Brought to you by Penguin.
Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. Read by Nabirye. Chapter 1. Amma. 1. Amma is walking along the promenade of the waterway that bisects her city. A few early morning barges cruise slowly by. To her left is the nautical-themed footbridge with its deck-like walkway and sailing mast pylons. To her right is the bend in the river as it heads east past Waterloo Bridge towards the dome of St. Paul's. She feels the sun begin to rise, the air still breezy before the city clogs up with heat and fumes. A violinist plays something suitably uplifting further along the promenade. Amma's play, The Last Amazon of Dahomey, opens at the National tonight. She thinks back to when she started out in theatre, when she and her running mate Dominique developed a reputation for heckling shows that offended their political sensibilities. Their powerfully trained actor voices projected from the back of the stalls before they made a quick getaway. They believed in protest that was public, disruptive, and downright annoying to those at the other end of it. She remembers pouring a pint of beer over the head of a director whose play featured semi-naked black women running around on stage behaving like idiots before doing a runner into the back streets of Hammersmith howling. Amma then spent decades on the fringe, a renegade lobbing hand grenades at the establishment that excluded her, until the mainstream began to absorb what was once radical and she found herself hopeful of joining it, which only happened when the first female artistic director assumed the helm of the National 3 years ago. After so long hearing a polite no from her predecessors, she received a phone call just after breakfast one Monday morning when her life stretched emptily ahead, with only online television dramas to look forward to. Love the script, must do it. Will you also direct it for us? I know it's short notice, but are you free for a coffee this week at all? Amma takes a sip of her Americano, with its customary Kickstarter extra shot in it, as she approaches the brutalist grey arts complex ahead. At least they try to enliven the bunker-like concrete with neon light displays these days, and the venue has a reputation for being progressive rather than traditionalist. Years ago, she expected to be evicted as soon as she dared walk through its doors. A time when people really did wear their smartest clothes to go to the theatre and look down their noses at those not in proper attire. She wants people to bring their curiosity to her plays. Doesn't give a damn what they wear, as her own sod-you style anyway, which has evolved, it's true, away from the cliché denim dungarees, Che Guevara beret, PLO scarf, and ever-present badge of 2 interlocked female symbols. Talk about wearing your heart on your sleeve, girl. These days she wears silver or gold trainers in winter, veil self Birkies in summer. Winter, it's black slacks, either baggy or tight depending on whether she's a size 12 or 14 that week, a size smaller on top. Summer, it's pattern harem pants that end just below the knee. Winter, it's bright asymmetric shirts, jumpers, jackets, coats. Year-round, her peroxide dreadlocks are trained to stick up like candles on a birthday cake. Silver hoop earrings, chunky African bangles, and pink lipstick are her perennial signature style statement. Yaz recently described her style as a mad old woman look, mum. Pleads with her to shop in Marks and Spencer's like normal mothers, refuses to be spotted alongside her when they're supposed to be walking down the street together. Yaz knows full well that Amma will always be anything but normal. And as she's in her 50s, she's not old yet, although try telling that to a 19-year-old. In any case, aging is nothing to be ashamed of, especially when the entire human race is in it together. Although sometimes it seems that she alone among her friends wants to celebrate getting older, because it's such a privilege to not die prematurely, she tells them, as the night draws in around her kitchen table in her cosy terraced house in Brixton, as they get stuck into the dishes each one has brought: chickpea stew, jerk chicken, Greek salad, lentil curry, roasted vegetables, Moroccan lamb, saffron rice, beetroot and kale salad, jollof quinoa, and gluten-free pasta for the really irritating fusspots, as they pour themselves glasses of wine, vodka, fewer calories, or something more liver-friendly if under doctor's orders. She expects them to approve of her bucking the trend of middle-aged moaning. Instead, she gets bemused smiles. And what about arthritic flare-ups, memory loss, and hot sweats? Amma passes the young busker. She smiles with encouragement at the girl who responds in kind. She fishes out a few coins, places them in the violin case. She isn't ready to forgo cigarettes, so leans on the riverside wall and lights one, hates herself for it. The adverts told her generation it would make them appear grown-up, glamorous, powerful, clever, desirable, and above all, cool. No one told them it would actually make them dead. She looks out at the river as she feels the warm smoke travel down her esophagus, soothing her nerves while trying to combat the adrenaline rush of the caffeine. 40 years of first nights, and she's still bricking it. What if she's slated by the critics, dismissed with the consensus of one-star reviews? What was the great national thinking allowing this rubbishy imposter into the building? Of course she knows she's not an imposter. She's written 15 plays, directed over 40, and as a critic once wrote, Amma Bonzu is a safe pair of hands who's known to pull off risks. What if the preview audience who gave standing ovations were just being kind? Oh, shut up, Amma. You're a veteran battle axe, remember? Look, she's got a fantastic cast. 6 older actresses, seen it all vets, 6 mid-careerists, survivors so far, and 3 fresh faces, naive hopefuls, one of whom, the talented Simone, will wander in bleary-eyed to rehearsals, having forgotten to unplug the iron, turn off the stove, or close her bedroom window, and will waste precious rehearsal time phoning her flatmates in a panic. A couple of months ago, she would have sold her grandmother into slavery to get this job. Now she's a spoilt little prima donna who ordered her director to pop out and fetch her a caramel latte a couple of weeks ago when it was just the 2 of them in a rehearsal room. I'm so exhausted, Simone whinged, implying it was all Amma's fault for making her work so hard. Needless to say, she dealt with little Miss Simone Stevenson in the moment. Little Miss Stevenson, who thinks that because she's landed at the National straight out of drama school, she's one step away from conquering Hollywood. She'll find out, soon enough. At times like these, Amma misses Dominique, who long ago absconded to America. They should be sharing her breakthrough career moment together. They met in the 80s at an audition for a feature film set in a women's prison. What else? Both were disillusioned at being put up for parts such as slave, servant, prostitute, nanny, or crim, and still not getting the job. They railed against their lot in a grotty Soho cafe while devouring fried egg and bacon slathered between 2 slabs of soggy white bread, washed down with builder's tea alongside the sex workers who plied their trade on the streets outside. Long before Soho became a trendy gay colony. Look at me, Dominique said, and Amma did. There was nothing subservient, maternal, or criminal about her. She was uber cool, totally gorgeous, taller than most women, thinner than most women, with cut glass cheekbones and smoky eyes, with thick black lashes that literally cast a shadow on her face. She wore leathers, kept her hair short except for a black fringe swept to one side, and rode about town on a battered old butcher's bike chained up outside. Can't they see I'm a living goddess? Dominique shouted with a flamboyant gesture, flicking her fringe, adopting a sultry pose as heads turned. Amma was shorter, with African hips and thighs. Perfect slave girl material, one director told her when she walked into an audition for a play about emancipation, whereupon she walked right back out again. In turn, a casting director told Dominique she was wasting his time when she turned up for a Victorian drama when there weren't any black people in Britain then. She said they were, called him ignorant before also leaving the room, and in her case, slamming the door. Amma realised she'd found a kindred spirit in Dominique who would kick ass with her. And they'd both be pretty unemployable once news got around. They went on to a local pub where the conversation continued and wine flowed. Dominique was born in the St Paul's area of Bristol to an Afro-Guyanese mother, Cecilia, who tracked her lineage back to slavery, and an Indo-Guyanese father, Wintley, whose ancestors were indentured labourers from Calcutta. The oldest of 10 children, who all looked more black than Asian, and identified as such, especially as their father could relate to the Afro-Caribbean people he'd grown up with, but not to the Indians fresh over from India. Dominique guessed her own sexual preferences from puberty, wisely kept them to herself, unsure how her friends or family would react, not wanting to be a social outcast. She tried boys a couple of times. They enjoyed it. She endured it. At 16, aspiring to become an actress, she headed for London, where people proudly proclaimed their outsider identities on badges. She slept rough under the embankment arches in a shop doorway along the Strand, was interviewed by a black housing association where she lied and cried about escaping a father who'd beaten her. The Jamaican housing officer wasn't impressed. So you got beats, is it? Dominique escalated her complaints to one of paternal sexual abuse, was given an emergency room in a hostel. 18 months later, after tearful weekly calls to the housing office, she landed a one-bedroom housing association flat in a small 50s block in Bloomsbury. I did what I had to find a home, she told Amma. Not my finest moment, I admit. Still, no harm done, as my father will never know. She went on a mission to educate herself in black history, culture, politics, feminism, discovered London's alternative bookshops. She walked into Sister Wright in Islington, where every single author of every single book was female, and browsed for hours. She couldn't afford to buy anything, and read the whole of Homegirls, a black feminist anthology, in weekly installments, standing up, as well as anything by Audre Lorde she could get her hands on. The booksellers didn't seem to mind. When I was accepted into a very orthodox drama school, I was already politicised and challenged them on everything, Amma. The only person of colour in the whole school. She demanded to know why the male parts in Shakespeare couldn't be played by women, and don't even get me started on cross-racial casting. She shouted at the course director while everyone else, including the female students, stayed silent. I realised I was on my own. The next day I was taken aside by the school principal. You're here to become an actor, not a politician. You'll be asked to leave if you keep causing trouble. You have been warned, Dominique. Tell me about it, Amma replied. Shut up or get out, right? As for me, I get my fighting spirit from my dad, Kwabena, who was a journalist campaigning for independence in Ghana until he heard he was going to be arrested for sedition, legged it over here, ended up working on the railways where he met my mum at London Bridge Station. He was a ticket collector. She worked in the offices above the concourse. He made sure to be the one to take her ticket. She made sure to be the last person to leave the train so she could exchange a few words with him. Mum, Helen, is half-caste, born in 1935 in Scotland. Her father was a Nigerian student who vanished as soon as he finished his studies at the University of Aberdeen. He never said goodbye. Years later, her mother discovered he'd gone back to his wife and children in Nigeria. She didn't even know he had a wife and children. Mum wasn't the only half-caste in Aberdeen in the 30s and 40s, but she was rare enough to be made to feel it. She left school early, went to secretarial college, headed down to London just as it was being populated by African men who'd come to study or work. Mum went to their dances and Soho clubs. They liked her lighter skin and looser hair. She says she felt ugly until African men told her she wasn't. You should see what she looked like back then, a cross between Lena Horne and Dorothy Dandridge. So yeah, really ugly. Mum hoped to spend their first date going to see a film and then on to her favourite spot, Club A Freak, right here in Soho. She dropped enough hints and loved to dance to high life and West African jazz. Instead, he took her to one of his socialist meetings in the back room of a pub at the Elephant and Castle, where a group of men sat guzzling beers and talking independence politics. She sat there trying to act interested, impressed by his intellect. He was impressed with her silent acquiescence, if you ask me. They married and moved to Peckham. I was their last child and first girl, Amma explained, blowing smoke into the already thickening thug in the room. My 3 older brothers became lawyers and a doctor. Their obedience to the expectations of our father meant I wasn't pressurized to follow suit. His only concern for me is marriage and children. He thinks my acting career is a hobby until I have both. Dad's a socialist who wants a revolution to improve the lot of all mankind, literally. I tell Mum she married a patriarch. Look at it this way, Amma, she says. Your father was born male in Ghana in the 1920s, whereas you were born female in London in the 1960s. And your point is? You really can't expect him to get you, as you put it. I let her know she's an apologist for the patriarchy and complicit in a system that oppresses all women. She says human beings are complex. I tell her not to patronize me. Mum worked 8 hours a day in paid employment, raised 4 children, maintained the home, made sure the patriarch's dinner was on the table every night and his shirts were ironed every morning. Meanwhile, he was off saving the world. His one domestic duty was to bring home the meat for Sunday lunch from the butcher's, a suburban kind of hunter-gatherer thing. I can tell Mum's unfulfilled now, we've all left home, because she spends her time either cleaning it or redecorating it. She's never complained about her lot or argued with him, a sure sign she's oppressed. She told me she tried to hold his hand in the early days, but he shook her off, said affection was an English affectation. She never tried again. Yet every year he gets her the most soppiest Valentine card you can buy, and he loves sentimental country music, sits in the kitchen on Sunday evenings listening to albums of Jim Reeves and Charlie Pride, tumbler of whiskey in one hand, wiping tears away with the other. Dad lives for campaigning meetings, demos, picketing Parliament, and standing in Lewisham Market, selling the Socialist Worker. I grew up listening to his sermons during our evening meal on the evils of capitalism and colonialism and the merits of socialism. It was his pulpit, and we were his captive congregation. It was like we were literally being force-fed his politics. He'd probably be an important person in Ghana if he returned after independence. Instead, he's president for life of our family. He doesn't know I'm a dyke. Are you kidding? Mum told me not to tell him. It was hard enough telling her. She said she suspected when pencil skirts and curly perms are all the rage, when I started wearing men's Levi's. She's sure it's a phase which I'll throw back at her when I'm 40. Dad has no time for the fairies and laughs at all the homophobic jokes comedians make on the telly every Saturday night when they're not insulting their mother-in-law or black people. Amma spoke about going to her first black women's group in Brixton in her last year at school. She'd seen a flyer at her local library. The woman who opened the door, Elaine, sported a perfect halo of an afro, and her smooth limbs were clad tightly in light blue denim jeans and tight denim shirt. Amma wanted her on sight, followed her into the main room, where women sat on sofas, chairs, cushions, cross-legged on the floor, drinking cups of coffee and cider. She nervously accepted cigarettes as they were passed around, sat on the floor leaning against a cap-mauled tweedy armchair, feeling Elaine's warm leg against her arm. She listened as they debated what it meant to be a black woman, what it meant to be a feminist when white feminist organizations made them feel unwelcome, how it felt when people called them nigger or racist thugs beat them up, what it was like when white men opened doors or gave up their seats on public transport for white women, which was sexist, but not for them, which was racist. Amma could relate to their experiences, began to join in with the refrains of, "We hear you, sister. We've all been there, sister." It felt like she was coming in from the cold. At the end of her first evening, the other women said their goodbyes, and Amma offered to stay behind to wash up the cups and ashtrays with Elaine. They made out on one of the bumpy sofas in the glow of the street lights, to the accompaniment of police sirens herring by. It was the closest she'd come to making love to herself. It was another coming home. The next week when she went to the meeting, Elaine was canoodling with another woman and blanked her completely. She never went again. Amma and Dominique stayed until they were turfed out, had worked their way through numerous glasses of red wine. They decided they needed to start their own theatre company to have careers as actors, because neither was prepared to betray their politics to find jobs, or to shut their mouths to keep them. It seemed the obvious way forward. They scribbled ideas for names on hard toilet paper snaffled from the loo. Bush Women Theatre Company best captured their intentions. They would be a voice in theatre where there was silence. Black and Asian women's stories would get out there. They would create theatre on their own terms. It became the company's motto, on our own terms or not at all. 2. Living rooms became rehearsal spaces. Old bangers transported props. Costumes came from second-hand shops. Sets were extracted from junkyards. They called on mates to help out. Everyone learning on the job, ad hoc, throwing their lot in together. They wrote grant applications on old typewriters with missing keys. Budgets felt as alien to Amma as quantum physics. She balked at becoming trapped behind a desk. She upset Dominique when she arrived for admin sessions late and left early claiming headaches or PMT. They rowed when she walked into a stationery shop and ran straight out again, claiming it had brought on a panic attack. She had a go at Dominique when she didn't deliver the script she'd promised to write, but was out late night clubbing instead, or forgot her lines mid-show. 6 months after its inception, they were constantly at loggerheads. They'd hit it off as friends only to find they couldn't work together. Amma called a make-or-break meeting at hers. They sat down with wine, a Chinese takeaway, and Dominique admitted she got more pleasure setting up tours for the company than putting herself in front of an audience, and preferred being herself to pretending to be other people. Amma admitted she loved writing, hated admin, and was she really any good as an actor? She did anger brilliantly, which was the extent of her range. Dominique became the company manager, Amma the artistic director. They employed actresses, directors, designers, stage crews, set up national tours that lasted months. Their plays, The Importance of Being Female, FGM the Musical, Disarranged Marriage, Cunning Stunts were performed in community centres, libraries, fringe theatres, at women's festivals and conferences. They leafleted outside venues as audiences left and arrived, illegally plastered posters onto billboards in the dead of night. They started getting reviews in the alternative media and even produced a monthly bushwoman samizat. But due to the pathetically poor sales and, to be honest, pathetically poor writing, it lasted for 2 issues after its grand launch one summer's evening at Sister Right, where a group of women rolled up to joy the free plonk and spill out onto the pavement to light up and chat each other up. Amma supplemented her income working in a burger bar at Piccadilly Circus, where she sold hamburgers made of reconstituted cardboard, topped with rehydrated onions and rubbery cheese, all of which she ate for free in her breaks, which gave her spots. The orange nylon suit and hat she wore meant customers saw her as a uniformed servant to do their bidding, and not her wonderful, artistic, highly individualistic and rebellious self. She slipped free crusty pies filled with apple-flavoured lumps of sugar to the runaway rent boys she befriended who operated around the station, with no idea that in years to come she'd be attending their funerals. They didn't realise unprotected sex meant a dance with death. Nobody did. Home was a derelict factory in Deptford with concrete walls, a collapsing ceiling, and a community of rats that defeated all attempts at extermination. Thereafter, she moved into a series of similarly squalid squats until she found herself living in the most desirable squat in the whole of London, a Soviet-sized former office block at the back of King's Cross. She was lucky enough to be one of the first to hear of it before it filled up, and stayed upstairs when bailiffs set a hydraulic excavator at the main door, which triggered violent countermeasures and prison sentences for headbangers who thought a bailiff down deserved a good kicking. They called it the Battle of King's Cross. The building was thereafter known as the Republic of Freedomia, and they were lucky too, because the owner of the property, a certain Jack Staniforth, living tax-free in Monte Carlo, loaded from the profits of his family's business in Sheffield cutlery, turned out to be sympathetic to their cause once news reached him from his estate holding company. He'd fought for the International Brigade in the Spanish Civil War, and a bad investment of a building in one of London's seediest districts was a forgettable footnote in his accounts. If they looked after the place, he wrote, they could stay for free. They stopped the illegal tapping of electricity and opened an account with the London Electricity Board. Likewise with the gas, hitherto powered by a single 50p piece jammed into the meter. They needed to set up a management system and gathered one Saturday morning in the lobby to thrash it out. The Marxists demanded they set up a central committee of the Workers' Republic of Freedomia, which was a bit rich, Amma thought, seeing as most of them had taken a principled stand against the running dogs of capitalism as an excuse not to work. The hippies suggested they form a commune and share everything, but they were so chilled and laid back everyone talked over them. The environmentalists wanted to ban aerosols, plastic bags and deodorant, which turned everyone against them, even the punks, who weren't exactly known for smelling minty. The vegetarians demanded a non-meat policy, the vegans wanted it extended to non-dairy, the macrobiotics suggested everyone eat steamed white cabbage for breakfast. The Rastas wanted cannabis legalized and a reserved plot on the land out back for the Nabirye gatherings. The Hare Krishnas wanted everyone to join them that very afternoon, banging drums down Oxford Street. The punks wanted permission to play shouty music and were duly shouted down. The gay guys wanted anti-homophobic legislation enshrined into the building's constitution, to which everyone replied, "What constitution?" The radical feminists wanted women-only quarters self-governed by a co-op. The lesbian radical feminists wanted their own quarters away from the non-lesbian radical feminists, also self-governed by a co-op. The black radical lesbian feminists wanted the same except with the condition that no whiteys of any gender were allowed inside. The anarchists walked out because any form of governance was a betrayal of everything they believed in. Amma preferred running solo and mixing with others who didn't try to impose their will on anyone else. In the end, a straightforward rotating management committee was formed, with various rules against drug dealing, sexual harassment, and voting Tory. The plot out back became a communal space featuring scrap metal sculptures, courtesy of the artists. Amma managed to lay claim to a typing pool so large she could jog around it, with its own private toilet and sink that she kept blissfully clean and suffused with floral scents. She coated the walls and ceiling with a striking blood-red paint, ripped up the corporate grey carpet, threw a few raffia mats on the wooden floor, installed a second-hand cooker, fridge, beanbags, a futon, and a bath reclaimed from a junkyard. Her room was big enough for parties and big enough for people to crash the disco beats of Donna Summer, Sister Sledge, Minnie Riperton, and Shaka Khan swirling on vinyl got her parties going. Roberta, Sarah, Edith, Etta, and Matilda Santing were the soundtracks to her end-of-night seductions. Behind the 18th century black lacquer Chinese screen rescued from the skip outside the old Chinese embassy. She worked her way through many of the women of Freedomia. She wanted one-night stands, most wanted more than that. It got to the point where she dreaded passing her former conquests in the corridors, like Maurice, a translator from Guadeloupe. If she wasn't knocking on Amma's door in the middle of the night, begging to be let in, she was lurking outside to harass whoever was getting what she wanted. This progressed to name-calling from her window whenever she saw Amma approaching the building, all of it coming to a head when she tipped a bucket of vegetable peel over Amma one day as she passed beneath her window, infuriating both the environmentalists and the management committee, who took it upon themselves to write to Amma that she stopped shitting on her own doorstep. Amma wrote back how it was interesting that quickly people turned into totalitarian fascists once they'd been given a little power. But she learned her lesson and wasn't short of attention. Groupies queued up for Amma and Dominique as the main players of bush women theatre, everyone from baby dykes in their late teens to women who could be their mothers. Amma didn't discriminate. She bragged to her friends that her tastes were truly egalitarian, as they traversed culture, class, creed, race, religion, and generation, which happily gave her a bigger playing field than most. She kept her predilection for big tits quiet because it was unfeminist to isolate body parts for sexual objectification. Dominique was more selective and monogamous, serially so. She went for actresses, usually blonde, whose microscopic talent was overshadowed by their macroscopic beauty, or models whose looks were their talent. Women-only bars were their hangouts: Fallen Angel, Rackets, The Bell, the Drill Hall Theatre Bar on a Monday, where the lesbian arty hung out, and Pearl Shabine in Brixton on a Friday night run by Pearl, a middle-aged Jamaican woman who stripped her basement of furniture, set up a sound system and charged at the door. Amma experienced commitment to one person as imprisonment. She hadn't left home for a life of freedom and adventure to end up chained to another person's desires. If she slept with a woman more than 2 or 3 times, they usually went from attractively independent to increasingly needy within the space of a week. She'd become their sole source of happiness as they moved to assert their authority over her autonomy by any means necessary. Sulks, tears, accusations of selfishness and heartlessness. Amma learnt to head all women off, to state her intentions up front, to never sleep with the same person twice or pushing it thrice, even when she wanted to. Sex was a simple, harmless human pleasure, and until her late 30s, she got a lot of it. How many were there? 100? Another 50? Surely not more than that. A couple of friends suggested she try therapy to help her settle down. She replied she was practically a virgin compared to male rock stars who boasted conquests of thousands and were admired for it. Did anyone tell them to go and get psychoanalyzed? Unfortunately, one or two of her early conquests have been harassing her on social media of late, where the past is just waiting to smack you in the face. Like the woman who posted that Amma had been her first when they slept together 35 years ago and had been so trash she vomited all over her. It was so traumatic. I never got over it, she wailed. Or the woman who chased her up Regent Street shouting at her for not returning her calls from around the same time. Who do you think you are, you pretentious show-off theatre lovey? You're nothing. That's what you are. Nothing. You must be off your meds, love, Amma shouted back before escaping into the subterranean warren of Topshop. Amma long ago lost interest in bed hopping. Over time, she began to crave the intimacy that comes from being emotionally, although not exclusively, close to another person. Non-monogamous relationships are her thing, or is it called polyamory now, as Yaz describes it, which as far as she can tell is non-monogamous in all but name, child. There's Dolores, a graphic designer based in Brighton, and Jackie, an occupational therapist in Highgate. They've been in the picture 7 and 3 years respectively, and are both independent women who have full lives and children outside of their relationship with her. They're not clingy, or needy, or jealous, or possessive, and they actually like each other, so yes, sometimes they indulge in a little ménage à trois upon occasion. Yaz would be horrified if she knew this. The middle-aged Amma sometimes feels nostalgic for her younger days, remembering the only time she and Dominique went on a pilgrimage to the legendary gateways, hidden down a Chelsea basement in the last years of its 50-year existence. It was almost empty. 2 middle-aged women stood at the bar wearing men's haircuts and suits and looking as if they'd walked straight out of the pages of The Well of Loneliness. The dance floor was dimly lit, and the 2 very old and very small women, one in a black suit, the other in a 40s-style dress, danced cheek to Dusty Springfield singing The Look of Love, and there wasn't even a glittery disco ball spinning from the middle of the ceiling, sprinkling stardust onto them.
Thank you for listening. To continue the book, head to the link in the description below. And click here to subscribe to the Penguin YouTube channel for more audiobook samples and videos with your favourite authors. See you next time.